Good evening, everybody. Tonight we're going to do a demonstration on texturing. Most of the time you see most of my work is basically just shading. Like this is just a temperature controlled shade. That's all it is. There is absolutely no texture to it. It's smooth as the gourd is. That's all I did with this. When we're working on textures, we want to be able to see the fur in the animal, the lines in the leaves, things along that line. I always advocate doing my shading first, because to do the shading, then I can always put the layers on over the top. With some hair, though, I advocate doing it in layers, as I'll show you as we get going here. I want to go through some of the books that I've picked up over the years to give you an idea of if you're looking for certain things, like with this book. This is the introduction book, the complete pyrography workbook that's out. This is Poole's book. And in here, he has a wonderful section doing samplers where you can learn to do your various patterns. You're going to try out different tips to do different types of textures on. There's several pages in here that he has. And it's also a temperature control. He's going to show you how to burn real hot and how to use it very cool. And different pens are going to give you different textures. And I will go over this as we're going to go along because I've got a few samplers I brought with me. But this is going to tell you the type of pen tip that you're going to use and what you can get out of it and what kind of textures you can use. As you can see, I've got a bunch of different pens up here. I've collected them over the years. Some of them I rarely use and others of them I use all the time. It just depends on the application of the pen and what kind of texture you're looking for. These are nice references because you can write down the pen that you used, what angle it was done at and what temperature. And if you're primarily burning on bass tiles or wood, it's going to be pretty much about the same temperature for that pen, although you do want to check them either on the bottom or the back side of a piece before you hit the front with a hot pen, because you don't want to make a mistake with it. This one is our standard one that we've got here. This is a great one if you're looking to buy a burner, your very first burner. If you have one of the dime store, what we call dime store burners, it's just the craft store model that has the interchangeable screw-in metal tips. This is a great book for that. This book is basic book. It shows you how to use that basic burner and comes with some very nice patterns in it. But this book is dedicated just to the simple craft burner. This one has a wonderful section in here on different types of burners, and it will go through each individual model that's on the market today, tell you the pros and cons and the price. Now the prices may not be current, but you can always go online and find your current price on these. So if you're looking for a burner, this would be a good place to do a comparison. If you're at a show, a lot of the times the vendors will have burners out that you can try them with different tips and things to see which one you like best. And I always advocate that this is the basic thermistor, the voltage regulator, and it's all about the pens. I carry different types of pens. These are traditional Colwood pens. They come out, they have the male ends on them, and that's what this burner takes, is a male end because it's a female on the line cord. This is a razor tip, and I have several of them. I like the razor tips. They have a wider variety, but they come female ended only, so they don't really work, but Radio Shack makes these little adapters. You can also find these mini jack adapters. This is a male-to-male adapter. Plugs in here, plugs in the end of the pen, good to go, it'll work. You can also find, in the second-hand stores, you can also find line cords that have these male ends on both ends. Instead of using the entire length, just splice it off, just cut the ends off and then solder it back together and tape it up. Works just fine as an adapter. There's always ways to make these pens work, but this gives you a really nice wide variety. When I burn, I have a tendency to burn for many hours. These get so hot I can't hang on to them, any of them. It doesn't matter what it is. It just gets so hot in my hand. So I use this pipe insulation, and as they get warm, they expand, so I have to put a rubber band around it. But it gives me a nice cushion. If you're one of these people who grips your pens really tight and you get cramps in your hands, this is a nice way to relieve some of that pressure. It's softer, gives you a little more cushion to use. And with these, you can cut them short enough that these vents down here that have to be opened to release some of the heat can still do so. With the coal woods, they don't have those, so you could basically cover all the way down to the end with the pipe insulation to rest your whole hand on it. When we're doing textures, most of the time we're going to see hair. That's our number one. If it's on the outside of the animal or it's just short lines. And we're going to do shorter hair first. I've done a little tile here that you can see that has some direction to the hair. And I find that if you start out doing lighter hair first on the side here, you're just going to put in some directional lines. You're going to make them fairly light to indicate which direction. And leave them far enough apart so it's just giving you the directional lines. I'm using a mini spear tip on these. And that's just going to give you that first layer. I know it's really light and it's going to be harder to see that way. But it's also going to give you the direction that you need to go. So when you come in on the next layer, you can come in and work Remember that we want to stagger these. We don't want to do them in rows. We want them random. And if you keep the temperature down, you can build up the layers of hair as you go. If you're doing a large burning, sometimes it gets very tedious to do a lot of hair like this. So what I ended up doing is 10 minutes at a time, take a break, go do something else, and then come back. I'm going to use a little bit larger pen this time. We're going to check this on the side. Yep. If we get too much smoke on this, it's burning too hot. So we always turn the pen down, so it's easier just to check it on the side. Different pens take different temperatures. You think because this was larger, it would take more heat. It doesn't. It just takes a little less heat. So now we can come back in. And it's real quick. But by doing it in multiple layers, it's going to give you more dimension to the hair as it goes in. And in changing the tip a little bit, just give it a little twist. It'll change the direction just slightly so that the hair doesn't look like it's completely groomed down unless you're doing a show dog with really nice smooth hair. Most of us are doing wildlife. They don't have a hairbrush. You want to make one spot darker, just slow down a little bit. Quite a few of the books I have will show folks taking a razor blade and scraping off a layer or sanding down a layer and then dusting it off and then doing it again. It's all because they're burning too hot. I don't want to waste all that energy. I just keep going. You can always add more layers to it as you get where you want to be. Just by taking your time and not putting quite as much heat to it. Okay, that was our short hair. Now we're going to go for the medium length hair, and this is the way Susie Walters does hers. She'll start out by doing the shading first. As you can see on here, she does the shading first underneath each one of the hair clumps. And then she'll go back in and she'll cut the outlines into the hair, and then she adds the details in afterwards. So this is a little bit more like a medium length hair. This was off of her wolf that's on the front of this book. This is my #1 recommendation book. It's got a great troubleshooting pattern in the back. She does animals that are more lifelike than anybody I've seen. She's just a wonderful burner. So basically we're going to go in here, we're going to do a little shading. I like to do the scrumbling, which is in the small, tight, circular patterns. I've done some of this already, but we want to just get into just a little bit darker up in the corners. So you can highlight some of that. Okay, from there, switch that out. We're going to go back to the spear. And then we're going to do the outlines. Biggest thing with working with a flat blade is being able to roll it in your fingers to be able to get it to curve. And that'll give you that, and then we'll come back in and do some accents. Give you a little more of that, and then we can come back in and we'll turn this down just a little bit. And you can lay it on its side, get a little more shadow to it. So you don't always need to change to a shader if you can use the edge and just lay the blade flat down. And the tip will ride right into the groove that you've already cut in with your other burner. So we get a little more hair that way. Then on the other side, I've done extremely long hair. And this takes a little bit more skill. It's like burning a feather. The finer the lines, the closer together you get it, the more realistic it's going to look. And that's just a process of practice where we're going to take these. I normally start out and I'll do sections. Now section off one of these little sections here, and then go back in and fill it in so that I'm having the direction of the hair already in place.
You sharpen your blades after you buy them?
Some of them I do. I have these little sanding bricks. They have different courses on them. The only time I ever really sand them is when they get a lot of buildup on them. If I'm burning really hot, they'll have a little bit of carbon built up on them. So I like to keep them a little cleaner. I've also got a leather piece that I'll just wipe them on that I like real well. As far as sharpening, these are really thin. The heavier ones, like this blade, I don't need to sharpen it. I've got something that's finer in my kit. Because the more you sand on these, the weaker it's making the metal, and eventually the tip will break. The legs will separate out or it'll split in the center. And I've broke a few of them because you get into a deep spot, you turn it, and then the legs will just snap open. And then you're out of pen. And at $16 to $20 to $30 a piece, the last thing you want to do is break them because they're kind of expensive to get replaced. And that's where most of mine have ended up is getting broken, is just from twisting them in a deep burn instead of letting the tool do the work. I also usually wear a 3X magnifier when I'm doing this. But then we go back in and I just did the shading in between so that you can highlight and low light on those. And there's our hair. Next one I'm going to do is wood. We do a lot of barn scenes and old barns and bridges and plank wood. Again, with the blade, either a skew or a spear. What I've done is I've gone ahead and penciled the lines in. I'm just going to follow in the lines I've already drawn on here to make the wood grain. This is kind of random. It's kind of fun to do the wood because it's easy to just take and make your own pattern up as you go, how the wood's going to go and the graining. Throw a few eyes and knots in it. Okay. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this down just a hair, and I'm going to lay the blade on the side. Just come in here and follow that edge to give it a little bit of a shadow. This gives a little bit more realism to the wood. And just follow the lines that you've already put on, just to give a little more interest to it. Now I can come in here, and I have a spoon shader. This is cupped like this. And you can add just a little bit of realism going in here. Let's check this. Now this is a bigger one. I turn it up a little more. Make your shading just a little wider. Okay, and we're going to go and do the barn planks. I'm going to use the wider blade on this one. Straight lines can be really tough if you haven't practiced. This is something that you want to make sure that you get down. The burning's a little heavier. It's a little overburnt. Then we get the bleed on the edges where it gets fuzzy and yellow. And I'll hand this around so you can see what that looks like. It's a little too hot. We'll switch back to spoon and do the shading. It's a nice part about you can just switch pens so quickly. We're going to come back in here and we'll just add the shading. These are your cheapest pens. That's a separate tip and a separate handle. But because you're constantly yanking these apart, there's more cost for breakage. Some of these tips, like this, is a circle piece that goes on here. I like the weird stuff. Buy different pens for different reasons. But I also like them because it adds different depths to what you're working on. This is a large tip. We're all the way up to 6 or 7. I usually burn between 3 and 4 on my burner. I don't like to get up too hot. You don't want to make the tips glow. If they start turning bright red, you're overheating it and it stresses the metal out. And it shortens the life of your pen. There's a lot of different size and different shapes of pens. They're coming out with new ones all the time as they come out with different designs. And they're fun to play with. Do little circles. This is.
Pen greaser tip will make it for you too.
Yep. And this is their teardrop. This is a large teardrop that they've come out with. I've done some of the teardrops here. I've got some other tiles here that shows different patterns that we've made with the teardrops. The nice thing is when you're playing with your pens is not just to use them in their intended method, to try using them on their side. Even the points are different on them. It's almost like a brand. Makes interesting work to do with some of these different ones. And as you can see, you can make borders out of them. The They make vine patterns out of them, flowers. It just depends on what you're looking to do with your pens. So you always want to try and experiment with them, try different pens. The fish scale, I bought one and then realized I had to have like 7 or 8 of them to do one fish. And this one was 36 bucks, and I went, yeah, a little too much. I'll hand draw them on first because I'm too cheap. That's just a lot of money to put into for it, but they're fun to use. And it makes scaling really quick. Most of the time I have a air filter sitting next to me, or a fan facing out so that it takes all the smoke out of the room, or at least out of my face. But it doesn't take long to do fish scales at all once you've got them going. And you can use it to do different kinds of things with it, just play around. I have ball shaders that I use a lot of. They come in various sizes. This is the largest one that I have, and I have, as you saw, the micro one, which is the smallest one, and going from 3 millimeters down to 0.3. So it goes my extremes. And these I do a lot of stippling on. This is an example here, going from the 3 different sizes all the way down to the really fine ones. Stippling is just a series of dots. When I worked on this piece, on these tree branches, one side is solid lined and the opposite side is stippled, and then we pulled the shading in arcs across to give the illusion of roundness on the birch branches. And then I went back in and made little darker areas and little breaks in the bark like you would normally see on the tree, and went back and filled them in. Each one of these branches I've gone over at least 3 times before I finished it. Some of them have 4 times on them just to get the shading on them. So it's just a process of layering your color on as subtly as you can, then building up the color. Because the more layers you have, the more depth you're going to have in your wood burning. The same with the deer. I've left the chest area right here uncut, but the rest of it, you can feel the cuts in here, and this is all done with that little spear, but it gives you the texture in it. The antlers are stippled on here, but the body is done with the line work with the hair on it. All the shading was done first on the buck. But the trees, we just drew them on. As you can see, some of them are not finished yet. I've been working on this, trying to get this one done this winter. So basically all I'm doing is making sure that all of these are done correctly and that they all have shadows above or below depending on where they're going. With the stippling, like we did on that one, it's basically, set that out of the way so you guys can see, it's basically just dots. The larger the dot and the closer together they are, the darker the area is going to be. The further away they are, the lighter they're going to be. And this is a great way to add texture and shading to a piece, is just by doing the stippling. It can be very light and subtle and very small if you're using a much smaller pen than this. So they have them in different sizes so that you could do knot holes in the bark like we did, or in the wood like we did here, and add different depth to it. You can also do just decorative border if you just want to do a series of dots. A lot of the Aboriginal art is done with just dot art. You can do a great deal of detail with just stippling. So it's a nice big, yeah, we can do color over the top of any of your wood burnings. I prefer to use something that's transparent, whether it be stamping inks, watercolors, colored pencils, acrylics that are thinned down to a wash, so that when you color over them, you can still see the burning through them. There's a lot of times that I know that you guys carve birds and you do a lot of feather burning, and then you paint over the entire thing. If you don't do a good burning, no amount of paint's going to cover up a bad wood burning. It's just going to make it show up. So take your time, do your wood burning, and the biggest thing is what you're doing, your feathers, is to do the real tiny fine S's that are in the feather. And that, again, it takes a twist. I love these little things. And just do the other side. They're fun to play with. This is scrap birds. Another thing I always keep is my pencil. So we're going to start out, we're going to have our center line in here. Right up next to the stem first to give us our guideline. Then as you notice, I always check my pens on the side just to make sure that I'm not going to be overly burnt. I can always go back over line to make it darker. You just can't make it lighter. Particularly working on a gourd because the shell is so thin that you can't sand it. If you're going to go through, it's going to go all the way through. This piece had a lump right here, a little wart of some kind on the surface of the gourd. So when it's sanded through, it was very white. And I took the large shader and went over it at a low temperature to try to bring some of the color back out so it wasn't quite so obviously as a big white spot on the gourd. So you can blend in a little bit by using a lower temperature for that application. When you're doing the feathers, I found though that it's all in about the roll in the hand. And these micro blades that they come out with now, you can get very close to one another. But again, it's just getting that twist in. So if you want to even just practice on these, as you can just sit here and just make S's. I like to stay up on the tip so that I have more control over the turn. It's easier to turn the tip than it is to try and turn the whole edge. And the speed, it will depend on how fast you work. And by slowing down, you're going to get it darker. So practice on a scrap first before you start on your project so that you've got more control over it. And that way you're not going to burn too dark or too hot. Any other questions? That's our show, folks. Thank you.